Good afternoon and welcome back to Black Press USA Live. Today we have Congressman Alcee Hastings, who represents his native state of Florida by serving as Congressman for District 20, which includes parts of Broward and Palm Beach counties. During the 116th Congress, Representative Hastings served as the Vice Chairman of the House Rules Committee and Chairman of the U.S. Helsinki Commission. And he's also Dean and Co-Chairman of the Florida Delegation. Congressman Hastings was first elected in 1992 and is currently serving his 14th term in the Congress. He's known to many as Judge Alcee Hastings, and he's distinguished himself as an attorney, civil rights activist, judge, and now member of Congress. Welcome, Congressman Alcee Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. I'll take you around to introduce me. I appreciate that warm introduction. Thanks so very much.
Well, it's great to have you. We have been making it a point to have you and your fellow CBC members on, beginning with your chair, Karen Bass, to talk about the issues that face America, but particularly African Americans. And,
yes.
And let's start with the COVID-19 situation. You're in Florida, and we know a lot's been going on there. It's a hot spot, if you were, as it were. Can you tell us a little bit, update us a little bit about what's going on in Florida?
I appreciate the opportunity and thank the Black Press for what you're doing. It's so critical and important. Our governor in the state of Florida is a pure, unadulterated sycophant of the President of the United States. I refer to him as Donald Trump light. Virtually everything that the Trump administration does that can impact a state, he follows that kind of mantra from the president. We have been and are the hotspot at one point 2 weeks ago of the world, not just in the state of Florida. And what has happened is, for example, these crazy people are talking about opening schools like 2 years ago. That's not going to work. And I think everybody knows that. It's an extremely complex issue. And for African Americans, that complexity doubles because they're working poorly paid jobs in the first place. And what we find here in Florida is unemployment compensation. There are 1 million people that still have not received unemployment compensation in Florida because the previous governor, who is now a senator, rigged the system so that people would not be able to even qualify. And it makes them have to jump through hoops. That's just one arena. The other thing is we open businesses too soon. Somebody needs to say that other than Dr. Fauci and medical experts. When we were shut down for 2 months, we were not really on full lockdown like Italy or Germany were or South Korea. And so what happened when we opened up, and I agonize with business persons. I've owned a business and I know what it means to people. As a matter of fact, footnote right there, many African-American businesses, after the first round of this stuff starting in March, have gone out of business and are not likely to return, Mr. Brown. And so this next act that's called Heroes, my hope is that not only here in Florida, but around this nation, that we will see to it that minority-owned and operated businesses have first shot at the bank rather than insurance companies and big old hamburger places receiving large amounts of money. So Florida follows Trump, and that's a mistake in my judgment for the governor of this state.
Yeah, and we know that this disease, you talk about Dr. Fauci and other experts, but this disease has lasting effects. We talked a little bit about that, you and I off camera. Can you expand on that a little bit and let the viewers understand that after someone recovers, doesn't necessarily mean they fully recovered or will fully recover?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're nowhere near what they refer to as herd immunity. And the simple fact of the matter is that you can be asymptomatic and still pass along and transmit this virus. The added instance that I think that some people are mistaken about are children. Children can transmit the virus, particularly those 10 or older. And that's why the school issue is so critical. But the other thing that we have done in the world, which is just wrong, is we've let the elderly die. Here in Florida, many of our deaths have occurred in senior living facilities, and you might expect as a retirement state that we would have a lot. But this disease has laid bare the disparities that exist in this society of ours here in America. And there are African Americans, we are referred to as a community that has comorbidities. And to a relative degree, that is true. We have a high incidence of diabetes, stroke, heart disease, overweight, all of those things. But the question isn't whether or not we have the comorbidities. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And in Congress, if left to the devices of some there in Congress, we aren't going to do anything. Evidence what transpired last week with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer doing everything they can to try to get Mnuchin and Mark Meadows on board with some kind of reasonable undertaking under what is referred to as the HEROES Act. And remember now, 3 months ago, the Democrats passed this particular measure. So I personally find it offensive that Republicans are trying to blame Democrats for there not being adequate funding for housing, adequate funding for schools, adequate funding for employment compensation. All of these are things that this disease has laid bare. This nation can never be the same again. And obviously, the many issues that are raised, from racial injustice to housing to lack of educational opportunity. And I want to drop a footnote right there. Broadband becomes critical. I argued with a Republican colleague of mine telling me about rural needs for broadband. And I agree with him 100%. I represent small communities here in Florida: South Bay, Pahokee, Belglade, Canal Point, smaller urban areas, Riviera, which is the one that I would bring up now, which is an urban area that does not have broadband. That 60-year-old housing that exists in this country doesn't allow for the Black press streaming that will allow for youngsters to be able to virtually participate in education. And it is extremely disturbing. That's something that Congress should push to its highest level, unless we wind up leaving a substantial number of children behind. And as schools resegregate and resources are not allocated to Black schools, then you can reasonably expect that we're going to leave a whole lot of people behind as we move toward all of this machinery and technology in the not too distant future.
Yeah, Rep. Hastings, over the weekend, we know, speaking of the HEROES Act, we know that the president decided to use some executive orders, or announced he was using some executive orders to extend certain benefits, if you will. What does those executive orders really mean? And what does it mean, more importantly, to the negotiations?
It impacts the negotiations. It undermines them for him to come out like that. This guy is so busy trying to be reelected until he's not looking at the things that he's doing. For example, these executive orders impact on the power of the purse. That's in the hands constitutionally of the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. So toward that end, let's use one as a for example of his so-called executive orders. I might add, he'll be in court before day's end. I promise you that there are lawsuits that are prepared to address this particular subject. He doesn't have the authority to do what he's doing. He just creates these distractions and leads people to believe that things are going to be okay, and they're not. For example, when he talks about payroll taxes, that impacts Social Security. Hear me, people. It impacts Social Security and Medicare. And regrettably, too many states did not expand Medicaid, which deals with poor people. Toward that end, his executive orders are, in my opinion, are nugatory. It is nothing more than Donald Trump being Donald Trump. And I'm doing everything I can, along with members of the Democratic Caucus and the Democratic Black Caucus, and hopefully the Biden campaign and those that are his functionaries in that campaign are doing everything they can to send this guy to Bedminster and the golf course.
You know, it's interesting, Congressman, that you mentioned Social Security. There's a report or a study that shows that under these executive orders that the president issued over the weekend, if they were to go through, Social Security would be in danger of running out entirely in 8 years.
Yeah, and there is no question, but that's the case. I think you're referring to a Yale study, one of them that I saw just recently. You know, who are these people that work with this guy? Jared Kushner? Some mid-30-year-old person running the world? Excuse me, I've been involved in international affairs, and it is not an easy undertaking. And what this administration does with these distractions is cause us not to pay attention to such things. For example, at the State Department, how they have just taken the core of the State Department, not filled positions. And I'm just coming from a trip abroad that included Tunisia, Morocco, Israel, London, and Vienna, Florida, where my principal meeting was. And we are, in many instances, among my colleagues that I know abroad, both in Asia and in Europe, I don't know that many in South and Latin America, but Gregory Meeks takes up the slack there in working for diversity in that area, as I have in Europe. And many of those colleagues of mine consider the United States the laughingstock of the world at this point.
Wow, what a change, huh? Than it was even 4 years ago, correct?
Absolutely. Anybody that didn't miss Obama misses him now. And I'm hopeful that President Obama will be involved in this upcoming election more than he has been. It has to have perfect timing, and he does have that ability and has demonstrated it already. For example, the interview that he had with John Lewis really resonated before John's death. And I was saying earlier that I full well anticipate First Lady Michelle Obama will be out there. And when she does, you're going to see lightning strike in the African-American community. And it's a must. You know, Mr. Brown, we haven't touched yet, and I know we can't touch on everything, but voting rights are critical. This is the 55th anniversary of the signing of the Voting Rights Act. John Lewis made it his life work, and many of us who have been involved in civil rights have also spent an awful lot of time trying to protect the election. In the HEROES Act, the second version that has not been signed on to by the Republicans at this point, there is money for election protection, for increasing early voting, and for having an opportunity for people to mail in, or as Jim Clyburn says, vote from home. And the Republicans are not coming on board in that regard. Why spend so much time trying to stop people from voting? It is indicative of the fact that they cannot win a fair election. And we need to be mindful of that. Those of us that are elected officials nationwide, especially those of us in Congress, need to do everything we can to help educate the public about mail-in and to make sure that they either early vote or are going to the polls on November the 3rd. I maintain all of the above. But if you are going to mail in, then you need to be mindful that the president has appointed another one of his hacks as the Postmaster General and is impacting the post office in a meaningful way. And we know that minorities, especially African Americans, especially veterans, are employed by the postal services, and they take their business seriously. What is needed is $25 billion, is what the Board of Governors, all appointed by Donald Trump, say is needed for the post office to undertake its business. But what we are witnessing is that the post office is slowing down the mail so that it can impact mail-in ballots. Curiosity there, Mr. Brown. The Republicans beat the Democrats in Florida in the last election by 58,000 votes in mail-in, and they don't want no mail-in. What we have managed to do is catch up with them and pass them.
And, you know, speaking of voting, speaking of the election, any time now, as early as today, Joe Biden is expected to finally choose that running mate.
Right.
How important at this point, Congressman, is it a Black woman?
It is extremely important, and it will set off a charge in the African-American community, because it will give us an opportunity to have someone that's next in line. And the vice presidential undertakings now are much more significant than they were, particularly with the world in disarray because of this COVID virus. So I full well expect we have an embarrassment of riches in the candidates that have been mentioned. Here in Florida, we have the former chief of police, Val Demings, who is on the short list. Kamala Harris, a former attorney general of the state of California and now Senator. Susan Rice, who I've known throughout her career. Susan is a tough negotiator and is being considered. Stacey Abrams, as I said earlier, no one has done as much about voter protection than has Stacey. And then Major Lance's daughter, you all are too young to know Major Lance, but Major Lance's daughter, Lisa Bottoms there in Atlanta, is also on that list. And there are others, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, the
and so is your
Michigan.
Yeah, so is your CBC chair, Karen Bass.
And I got so busy there that I overlooked perhaps the most important one, and that is Karen, who came out of the wings nobody was expecting. But Karen has done an extraordinary job. I mean, I have seen 14 chairs of the Congressional Black Caucus. 13 of them have been here to my congressional district on my behalf. And I can tell you this, hardly any of them match the kind of work. And you all in the Black press have seen significant changes in the way the Black Caucus is communicating with the public, thanks to you all at the Black Press of America and your colleagues in the NNPA around the country. That's another area that we need to make sure that Biden and Trump, for that matter, advertise in the African-American press. It is critical. They spend all that money on television that people turn off and start trying to stream Game of Thrones to don't see the advertising. And here we are with pretty much a captive audience that does pay attention, and some of that advertising should be beamed toward African Americans and people of color. And indeed, the Black press should benefit immensely from the advertising. I can tell you right now that this election is going to cost more than $2 billion. If the African American community just got 5% of that in the press, it would make a big difference in how this election turns.
Yeah, and one of our viewers, David Youngblood, he wants Joe Biden to run the gamut with African American women. He says it is imperative to choose a Black woman as VP, AG, and Secretary of the Treasury. David wants it all, but you know, Vice President Biden has said too that he wants an African American woman on the Supreme Court.
So
I think, David, if you get a Biden presidency, you might get a whole lot of what you're asking for. Would you be disappointed, Congressman, if it's not a black woman that he chooses for his running mate?
I would be. I really would be. I would be just as involved in trying to defeat Donald Trump, because that's paramount in my view. But my level of enthusiasm would rise if there is an African American woman on the ticket. In addition, the Vice President, our nominee, has made it clear that he would like to see a black woman on the Supreme Court. Before we get to that level, keep our fingers crossed for the health of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a real champion and has demonstrated that she has staying power. And I promise you, if something were to happen toward her, the Republicans would make a mad dash to try to get Trump to appoint another justice to the Supreme Court. Also, David Youngblood, there are opportunities in the State Department and not only Treasurer. I don't know that, I don't want to leave us black men out of the opportunity to have an opportunity to serve in government as well. But women have demonstrated, African-American women, that they are the core of the Democratic Party. And as they turn, so do elections turn.
And not, you mentioned Justice Ginsburg, not to make light of her situation, but it seems as if she has decided that she's not going to die until there's a new president.
I'm on her side. And she and I suffer, as did John Lewis, the same disease. I've been battling pancreatic cancer. And I'd like to take this opportunity on the Black press to say that my doctors have indicated that my tumor is quiet. So that means that I can be noisy. So I'm hopeful to be deeply involved in this election. And it's from the State House to the White House. We need to win back some legislatures in the country. We need to elect some new African Americans and Latinx and Asian Americans and Native Americans. Real proud of the two ladies that are the Native Americans that are in Congress now, and they have joined the Caucus in many of our areas. As a matter of fact, we call ourselves the Caucus +2. And so I'm really very, very proud of the diversity that exists in the House of Representatives. You see more women there, more people of color, more people that are gay. And when I look over on the other side at all of the white men, I hold no resentment toward my colleagues. Many of them are people that I interface with because I must in order to be able to represent my constituents adequately, legislatively, and otherwise. But it is a strange looking environment to see so few women, one African American, two Latinos, and an identifiable number of white men. Very, very telling on what this nation would be if we were to continue them in office. And I'm hopeful that we can win the House of Representatives again, win the Senate, and win the White House. If we do, then it's on us Democrats to do those things that we should have been doing, and we have done an awful lot, but that we could have done when we were in office the last time, particularly protecting labor unions in this country and housing being addressed appropriately. We recognize that as an inadequacy throughout this nation, and it's critically important in my judgment that we move quickly toward those areas as well as justice reform. We have already passed the measure that will deal with such things as no-knock warrants and police being able to duck their responsibilities by simply saying my life was threatened, and therefore they find themselves in the position of not being sued as everybody else in this nation who does somebody wrong is available to the justice system. In addition, the no-knock warrant is one of the worst offenses that you can have. And the life of Tanya in Kentucky demonstrates that. How dare somebody knock down the doors of a person? And I might add, these people have not been brought to justice so far. What I'm hearing is there's an investigation ongoing. How much investigation do you need for you knock down the door and shot and killed a lady and alarmed her friend that was there, so much so until, and I was so happy that he was legally able to have his weapon. And he did the right thing in my judgment. If somebody comes busting in my door, I have a right to try to protect myself. But there are other areas. And we need, you know, Mr. Brown, we need to really correct this. Nobody wants to defund the police. We need police departments. There are 18,000 of them in this country. But we need police to be accountable. And we need for police to undertake their responsibilities in a manner that's not racist. You saw the incident, I forget what city it was in, where the two young girls and their aunts were about their business. And they put them on the hot pavement with their faces down with a child there. How insensitive that is. That's beyond the kind of thing that you would expect from someone who has a badge and a gun. That's another thing that needs to happen. Is there needs to be additional training, and the age group needs to rise for being a police officer. You can't send a 23-year-old to a domestic dispute between his man and his wife and himself, and expect that one of these youngsters, this 23 years old, is going to calm that kind of display. Not going to happen. I maintain that police officers ought to be 25 years of age and ought to be trained, yes, in sociology and yes, in psychology. And indeed, they should not have to bear all of those responsibilities. I wish we had time to deal with mental illness, suicide among teenagers, suicide among Black teenagers. I grew up in Altamonte Springs, Florida, and I am here to tell you, not a single one of us ever even thought about suicide. Now, we did some crazy things like jumping in the lake where alligators were, but we didn't think about
that's suicide.
taking a gun and killing ourselves. But no, I don't take it lightly that too many of our youngsters find themselves in this arena. The other thing we need, Mr. Brown, is continuous protesting. It cannot be one-off. We have captured the imagination of young people, especially young white people and young Latinos, who are participating in these demonstrations. But they need to be peaceful. We don't need to tear up anybody's property or steal things. This is not the time for that. And there are so many areas that do need attention, until I'm hopeful that we will find ourselves in more demonstrations, and they should be led by those of us that are in elective office around this country.
Yeah, and Congressman, we know we are a little pressed for time, but we with your permission, we'll go a little overtime here to discuss a couple more things with you.
Right.
You mentioned, the criminal justice. Just over the weekend, we find that back in December, this is 6 months before George Floyd said he couldn't breathe and called for his mother. We find that 6 months before that, North Carolina, a young man did the same thing. He called for his mother as 5 corrections officers and a nurse held him down. He also died. We are finding more of this, even with the video cameras going. You've talked about police reform. What needs to be the teeth of police reform? What has to be in a police reform bill?
Independent review. And I have argued it for 63 years. First, as a civil rights lawyer here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, there has to be independent commissions and not just the police. I'm a lawyer. There are citizens on the Board of Governors of the state of Florida's review of lawyer conduct. Police should not be absolved from that responsibility. And listen, what we need is the perfect police department. We don't need to have a society that does not have direction from authorities. But what we have now is not only unconscious bias, but invidious discrimination, patently shown by police. If you plug in an independent review of their conduct, then you will find their conduct will change, because they won't have these measures that allow them to sideline lawsuits. But in my judgment, the independent review is the most important. The other thing is to take some of the responsibility off of the hands of the police. Many of them do not want to be involved in social work, and rightly so. A lot of them, we should have core departments that carry with them the police, the psychologists, and the social worker to many of the incidents that are reported by our society.
Yeah, and Congressman, we also know that the census is huge.
Wow.
You know, to say that, I guess you can't overstate that, right?
Not at all.
But however, they have announced that next month they're going to end the count. A little premature.
Unbelievable. The Congressional Black Caucus member, in addition to several of them, is Stephen Horsford from Nevada. Any of you all that are interested, go to Stephen's site, and you will see both his official positions that are permitted under our guidelines, and his political positions. It is abhorrent. There are 60 million Americans that have not filled out their census. This accounts for how 50 plus of us are in the Congress that are African American because of the way districts are drawn. It means money to the various communities, the distribution of formulas that are allowed and mandated by the government. Please, please fill out your census. And even if it gets to the knocking on doors, and I know some people don't want to answer their doors because of COVID, but the census takers will have their masks, they'll have their badges, and they will stand a distance away from you and gather this information. I can't believe how many times Donald Trump has done destruction of the American institutions, not to mention the Justice Department, the Post Office, and I could go on and on. I've already talked about the State Department, the Pentagon, and we need to be mindful of all these things. But please know this, Mr. Brown, the Black Caucus is on the case. And with the leadership that we have, and with all of the member involvement, you have the likes of Hakeem Jeffries, who is chair of the Democratic Caucus, Jim Clyburn, who is the vice chair, and the Democratic whip, which collects our numbers when we have heavy votes. And so far, he has done a magnificent job. And I don't want to just center on African Americans. There are Latinos who are deeply involved. But listen to me, and I'll let this be my final statement if it's all right with you. I maintain, and I don't mean this in the sense that it comes out, but I don't think that people are really thinking about their best interests when they're talking about voting for Donald Trump. This is a man that says that he has done more for African Americans than anybody. Well, I guess Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer and countless other people must be turning over in their graves because they gave their lives, as did Cheney and Swerner and Goodman and Viola Liuzzo, for us to have these precious rights. And now it comes down to voting. And that is your voice. That's the lesson that we should hear from our colleague just departed, John Lewis. And it is the lesson that you should hear from sensible Americans that are patriotic, that want to make sure that everybody votes and that we have a free and fair election. I thank you all at the Black Press for the opportunity to be with you.
Absolutely, Congressman Alcee Hastings. And I know I can speak for our chair, Karen Carter Richards, and our president, Dr. Ben Chavis, in saying that we certainly hope that that tumor remains quiet.
Thanks so much. And tell Ben I said hello. I haven't seen him in a bit. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Tomorrow we'll have Congressman Danny Davis with us tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. Another star. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you now.